Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our presentation on security audits. I'm Angie Moskalenko, the Director of Business Development here at Affinity, and we also have Doug Hafford with us today. Doug is the CEO and founder of Affinity. Before we get started, I wanted to point out that everyone has been placed on mute, but we'd be happy to answer any questions at the end of our presentation. Please use the chat panel and submit your questions to me, Angie Moskalenko, or you can submit them to all. And Doug, if you can advance that slide, that would be great. This is so you can see the chat panel here. So go ahead and at the end of the presentation, we'll be opening up for questions. So go ahead and use that chat panel as mentioned. So for the agenda today, we'll start with a very brief introduction about Affinity and the services that we provide for those of you who aren't familiar with us. And then we'll launch into our main topic, security audits, which has been a topic of interest for many of our clients recently, especially with the growing corporate requirements placed on their law firms. We'll discuss security audits, what they entail, and what you can expect. And we'll also discuss what technology and what requirements are needed and how this might affect your firm. We'll also provide an annual checklist and best practices so you can be better prepared if faced with a security audit. So as I mentioned, I'd like to take a minute to talk about Affinity and the services that we provide. Affinity has been providing IT services for law firms for over 31 years. Doug Hafford started the company over 31 years ago, actually in his garage. Today, we have over 330 law firm clients and support over 10,000 users. About 3 years ago, after some extensive research and testing, mainly from our Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania office, we designed the Affinity Cloud Platform, which is a cloud network specifically designed for law firms. Today, we have about 75 firms successfully running their networks in the Affinity Cloud Platform, and that's nationwide. One of the great features, besides security, is that the Affinity Cloud Platform features unlimited support, which is a really nice cost and time-saving feature for our clients. We also provide consultation on various IT solutions for our clients and offer recommendation, implementation, as well as system integration. We have in-house trainers that provide training on various Microsoft Office products and for legal specific applications as well. In addition, we have macro programmers on staff and provide customized macros and templates. If you're interested, we'd be happy to provide a demonstration anytime. We're certified partners for ProLaw, iManage, WorkShare, and others. Our engineers are experts at legal specific applications. And finally, we offer Affinity University, which are monthly educational webinars featuring topics for the legal industry, and some of which are approved for MCLE credits. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Doug Hafford, CEO and founder of Affinity. Doug has been assisting several of our clients navigate their way through security audits recently. Doug, take it away. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Angie. If you can just confirm that you can hear me, that would be great. I think you can, because it says you can.
I can.
So Angie, maybe just, okay, perfect. So this is a very common thing in today's world. It seems like almost every week we get an inquiry from a client that is undergoing some sort of security audit from one of their clients. It started out as mostly banking clients as a result of the cyber threats that we all see in the newspapers and you know, just everywhere you look, there's information about all these different cyber threats. So banks were particularly concerned about how their data was handled, and they began a process of auditing the law firms that worked for them. And this has now spread to many other industries, in the insurance industry, just about any large corporation, and it's growing extremely rapidly. And what are they after? Well, they want to know that your network is secure from the sort of generalized cybersecurity threats, that you can quickly identify and stop any sort of data breach that might occur. This is a big deal, losing data through various methods, and you've probably seen it in the papers. We've seen it many, many times. They want to know if you had a disaster situation, could you get their data back efficiently and in a reasonable time frame? They want to know what you're doing about managing all of these risks. So it's not only technology. In fact, there are some key technology points, but certainly one of the largest burdens on the law firm when these audits occur is in policy creation. How the firm handles a disaster recovery situation, how the firm handles a data breach situation, who does what, when do they do it, how do they know, etc. So this is affecting a lot of our clients, and I personally have done with clients many of these. So I'm kind of used to the questions now. Many times it is an outside party. One of the big accounting firms, for example, will provide this for a bank as a consulting service. So you might actually be dealing with a third party when you're going through these audits. And they're extensive, there's a lot of paperwork, and it's a significant burden. So today what we're going to do is talk about how you can mitigate that burden to some extent, what to expect, and what technologies are going to be required. So the first question is always going to be, is your network secure on a very basic level? I think most people have a firewall, not all. Many people have firewalls that are either unlicensed for the gateway security suites and those sorts of things. Many are near or at end of life, and that can be extremely dangerous in today's world because there are so many vectors into your network. Is your anti-malware working? One of the biggest threats today is ransomware. I'm aware of one firm that has called us a couple of times regarding a ransomware situation, and the first time it happened, they lost a lot of data and did not take action. The second time it happened, they lost all their data, and to my knowledge, they still haven't taken any action. So this can be a very dangerous situation, and ransomware is real simple. The bad guys come in and they encrypt everything on your network, and then they ask you to pay them to unencrypt it. The problem arises not so much from paying them, because that's obviously a big problem. But two things happen. Number one, you've been breached. Number two, when they unencrypt, it doesn't always get everything back. So that's where we get into disaster recovery systems and those sorts of things, and being aware of what's going on. Do you have multi-factor authentication for your remote users? Are they required to not only have a username and password, but some other method of authentication? Generally, that would be a prompt on their handheld or a device that they have to have with them that might generate a code for remote access. How old is your system? Is it fully patched with the Microsoft security updates? But there are so many more. Adobe Acrobat, for example, has security issues. There are many applications out there that do, and older operating systems are much more difficult to patch. They end up carrying a very large burden of patches, so large that they can slow significantly. As time goes on, as the system ages, you get into a balancing act where one thing is updated and another thing is not, and pretty soon you start to see more and more breakdowns, which either puts a larger load on your IT staff, or it just causes users lots of problems. And over time, as a system ages, you will see that user needs grow. And it's not necessarily their needs, I misspoke there, more their issues grow. I always liken it to a juggler. The day that you put your system in, your juggler has 3 tennis balls and he has an easy time juggling. by 5 years, he's got a bowling ball, a feather, 2 of those club-looking things, and he is having a real hard time keeping it all in the air. Another important security measure is to educate your staff. We recommend at least once a year and some communication on, at the minimum, a 90-day basis, as well as current threats. Let me give you an idea of what that might take, how that might help. There was an email that went out from a hacker not too long ago that looked like it was offering new Office 365 features. It even had logos and a very Microsoft-looking login. When you put your Microsoft username, your email, and your password into the system to get those updates, the hacker had your credentials and was fully able to enter your system if you did not have multi-factor authentication. Multi-factor authentication stops that. So you want to educate your staff on what that might look like, what a phishing attack might look like, what malicious activity might look like. And then lastly, a true disaster recovery solution is an absolute must in today's world. So that means that your system should be at least backed up daily. That backup should at least go somewhere off-site. And you should have a plan for how you recover, not from the latest backup necessarily, but from any backup. So that brings into question, how many pictures of your system do you have? How far back can you go? And the reason that's important is the things like ransomware may have invaded your system without you knowing it and still be there in your latest backups, or maybe even your 2 latest backups. So it's very important to be able to walk back. It's very important to recover quickly, and it's very important that you're not solely on site with your backup system. So those are the basics. Now, what are the audits going to ask for? The common ones are as follows. Every bank that we've run into wants multi-factor authentication. Again, what that means is when you log in, you put in your username, your password, and then you use some other method of authentication. So that might be a USB token, or it might be a message sent to your handheld that you have to respond to. You have probably seen this with your banks. When you log into their websites, they may send you a text message and you have to put a code in order to access your system. They want data in motion encryption. That's essentially when you're transmitting data. Primarily, that's going to be email. So how your email connects to the outside world is extremely important to them. What your rules are, what kinds of encryption are enforced, et cetera, for any email, and do you have things like the ability to encrypt an email. The third one is data at rest encryption. I'm going to stop here for a second because there's 2 primary ways to attack your network, and people are trying to attack it right now. I will guarantee that. If you look at the logs in your firewalls, you'll see just people are pounding away on it. They're robots, really, but for all intents and purposes, you've got lots of people attacking you. The first method of attack is a credentialed attack, as I mentioned before, where someone is able to capture a username and password and therefore connect to your system and gather the data that they're looking for. The second is a non-credentialed attack. In that case, what they're doing is they're exploiting a security hole in either your operating systems. It could be Adobe Acrobat, could be a number of different ways, but they're opening a hole in the system to gain access inside the system. The prevention for that, which is required by every bank, is data at rest encryption. What that does is it encrypts your data within your network, and only a credentialed user can unencrypt that data. Now, to the user, it's seamless. They don't know it's going on. But the hacker has a problem, because when he does enter your system, all he sees is encrypted data. So if you have multi-factor and data at rest encryption, that's the best currently that you can do to stop unwanted people entering your network. Now you also are going to want they're also going to want data loss prevention, both, and this takes the form of both policies and tools. For example, in Office 365, if you get the higher levels, the enterprise levels, they will often include DLP. And what that does is it is looking for things like social security numbers, driver's license numbers, and that sort of thing in an email, and it will either warn or prevent the user from sending those things in an unencrypted email. So that's the primary data loss prevention. There's lots of others, but that's maybe the biggest one. They're going to look at your disaster recovery system. They're going to ask you about two things: RTO, recovery time objective. That's how long does it take you to get back from a true disaster, and RPO, recovery point objective. How much data are you going to lose when you do that recovery or restore? So they're gonna want those to be short periods of time. RTO, they're going to be looking at it being in hours. RPO, they're going to be looking for less than a day. They're going to, and this is a biggie, they're going to want physical security. If you have a network in-house, they're going to want cameras on it. They're going to want to have security card keys, some sort of logging for anyone who goes where the servers are, and a number of other measures potentially. Some even require that you have redundant power. And I don't know a single law firm that has a generator in their law firm, but maybe there are some. They're going to require you to do at least annual penetration testing. Penetration testing should always be done by a third party, not your IT vendor, not your internal staff. It should be done by a professional company that does that sort of thing. And they're going to want to see the results. There will always be some anomalies that are going to have to be corrected. The danger here is there are many predatory security firms who will come in to do a penetration test and then exploit that to try to sell you products and services, much like Affinity does. I'm just kidding. Try to tell you products and services built around security, and some of those might be valuable, but they can use scare tactics from time to time, and that to me is absolutely unacceptable. They're going to want limitations for administrative access. So, for example, some banks will want carefully controlled access for staff. So if someone needs administrative access, they're given it for the period of time they need it, and then it is taken away. They're going to want to carefully control who has administrative access and what they can do, what they can touch. And then probably the most challenging is the documentation and the policies themselves. Obviously, your users need to be aware of what the policies are, and many of you probably already have IT security related InfoSec, as they say, information security policies. The banks are going to want to see those. Or again, large corporations. So documentations and policies are extremely important for you. Sorry about that. Let me just turn these off. Stand by one moment while okay. So those are going to be extremely important part of your, let me just clear this so you don't see it. There we go. One of the biggies is going to be disaster recovery. And as I mentioned, they're going to want short RTO and RPO, and this will happen. You will lose data. And part of your disaster recovery plan, most of you guys probably already have it. It's always going to be time to review that because it will happen. And part of it is non-IT. Where are you, if the building is affected somehow, where are you going to go to work? Can you work in that remote location. So for example, if you have an on-premise network and there is a building power shutdown, depending on where your email lives, if it's in-house, you have no email. If it's outside the firm, like a hosted email like Office 365, which is the common one that pretty much everyone gets these days, then you don't have to worry so much about email. But what about your documents? What about your users being able to access documents? And what are all the different things that you have to take care of? So what about your phones? More and more firms are moving to hosted VoIP systems that are cloud hosted. We did recently. I have to say that is the greatest thing since sliced bread. Whichever one you pick, and we don't promote any one of them. There are some great solutions out there, and for us, they actually saved us a lot of money as well. So there's a bunch of things that you're going to need to take care of no matter what for disaster recovery, and all of these things should be attended to. But if you look on the bottom here, the last two, lost data and ransomware. Ransomware is really nasty. So you have to do all you can to protect yourself by having good firewalls in place and having good anti-malware in place, training your users on how to look for phishing attacks and those sort of things. But your disaster recovery system is what's going to save you. So how far back are you going to have to go to restore lost data in a ransomware attack? Those are key items. I would certainly find anything less than a day unacceptable. So there's some easy guidelines there, and I will touch on some better ways to do that. So as I mentioned, what are they going to ask you to have? They're going to ask you to have multi-factor. They're going to ask you to have encryption. Now, encryption is much more difficult and costly on an on-premise network versus a cloud network, at least in our cloud. There are many, I'm holding up my quote fingers, cloud solutions out there that aren't really the cloud. They're really a data center, and depending on what that host is doing, they may not have what we would consider proper encryption. They may not have the wherewithal for massive redundancy and those sorts of things. So I'm only going to talk about our cloud, which is when we do mention the cloud, which is based in the AWS cloud, largest cloud in the world, also the most secure place on earth. But on-premise means you're going to add software to do that. So what happens with that? Two things. Number one, there's a cost to that software. And number two, it is invasive. It is touching the operating system. It's touching your data. And there's just many more things that can go wrong when you're using a software encryption method. Data loss prevention, again, add-on products are needed for on-premise email exchange servers. Most cloud exchange solutions, again, most people get Office 365. That's certainly what we supply. Those, if you get into the enterprise levels, they include data loss prevention. And you're probably going to want to take another step and have in some cases, there's tools like Zixmail, which are very effective at providing simplified email, DLP, encryption, and all of those features. Physical security, again, for an on-premise network, that's a much more difficult animal to go after, because you're going to have to add a lot of things to your office, potentially, including, as I mentioned, security cameras and access codes, perhaps card keys and things to get into where the servers are. And in some cases, the banks even want security cameras for entry into your office. So again, that can be pretty invasive. Of course, a large cloud provider, Amazon, for example, has all of that already. They have generators. They have massively redundant internet connections. They have massively redundant data centers replicated among geographically diverse areas, and all with barbed wire, guard dogs, and very tight physical security. You're going to have to keep your operating system updated. And then the harder one is the other software updates. And there are many of them. There can be bad stuff hiding all over the place. The one we see the most often is Adobe. Our recommendation is always to buy a subscription model version of Adobe. Enterprise if you can, because Enterprise gives you some things that are nice for deploying products that use Adobe. In other words, related products like it better because of how it licenses. But if you have a subscription model license for Adobe, then your Adobe is at least giving you the opportunity to keep it up to date. And that's just crucial in today's world. Your security protection, we've seen many times when there was anti-malware in place, but it had been disabled for one reason or another. It's a fairly common thing to do with smaller individuals or smaller IT firms. If there is a problem, they will take the step of disabling anti-malware in order to test whether that is causing the problem. And it certainly can. It's not certainly a valid step. Or another common thing is to install a secondary or even a tertiary anti-malware product. In that case, those can actually disable each other. So that can be just as dangerous as having just one disabled. One might disable another. So you should have a single solution. We like the cloud-based solutions for that because they're up to date all the time. You don't have to worry about whether updates are reaching the users or the main system. If there's remote access available, then there's going to be lots of security around that. So they're going to want to know how you do it. They're going to want to know how you offer multi-factor for that sort of thing. Firm data on workstations is a big deal. Generally, workstations are not encrypted. Your banking clients will be less concerned about PCs, although they won't want any data on workstations. And a good policy is don't put any data on the workstation. But for laptops, they're going to want them to be encrypted. A common tool for that is BitLocker. If you have Windows 10, it comes with it. So it's a fairly simple matter to implement BitLocker. It does mean that if you lose the security key, you're done. That data is gone. So you never would want live data on a laptop. And again, in today's world, you know, I'm more in favor of the less smart laptop. Something like a Chromebook can be a very effective way to travel without having any data concerns, because you don't download data to it. You're only accessing it from remote locations. And with the ubiquitous nature of Wi-Fi, I really don't see a problem in today's world. And you can also, you know, most phones will create a Wi-Fi connection for you if you need it. Your system needs to be monitored in some way, either by your internal IT staff who are looking for trouble every day, looking at logs, looking for trouble spots. That's an essential part of your solution, and it's going to be a requirement for any bank. And lastly, as I mentioned, penetration testing. It has to be done by a third party. You don't want it to be done by your IT provider or by internal staff. The external folks will have an unbiased opinion. So get that done. Those are not cheap. That's probably a $7,000 to $15,000 proposition, depending on the makeup of your network, and it will be a requirement from the bank. So what are the effects of this? There's, again, on-premise networks are going to need some additional software. You're going to have to spend some money on that. It's an annual renewal generally. The most common one is a Symantec product. They will also try to leverage that into selling you a security monitoring solution. those are even more expensive and not necessarily a requirement. It would be really nice to have that, but not necessarily a requirement. User access restrictions are very, very important to any financial services client. They're going to want to know that your users are carefully given access on a need-to-know basis only. When you put up a Windows network, the default is that a user has no rights at all. So the administrator of that network has to give rights. So what they're going to want to see is that those rights are given only to the appropriate people, only to the people who need to know. And an example of that would be if in a firm there was a banking department, then the bank that is hiring that firm would only want their data available to that banking department and no other users. Their concern is that a user can be doing bad things. I should say that we will get a call about once a year or so, maybe once every 6 months. And the question will be, somebody left the firm, an attorney left our firm. We want to know if they took data with them. First of all, if we get that question, or if you are inclined to ask that question, I can tell you the answer is already, it is yes. If you think they did it, they did. The way they normally do it is they email things to a Gmail address that they've set up so that they can get them out, sometimes thousands of documents, for example. And so restricting access helps to solve that. And information security policies that are carefully adhered to and often updated. Audits by your own staff or by an outside party to see if there is anything unusual going on. Monitoring tools that can look for certain types of traffic that can alert you when something unusual is happening. Those are all valuable things. But possibly the biggest thing is just keep everything up to date. Almost every firm that we do upgrades for has some very old software that has been used for a really long time and everybody's used to it, and I completely understand that. It is a security risk. It is a problem. So when your software vendors ask you to update, be careful about brand new versions, but try your best to keep your software updated. It will make a huge difference, and also avoid future problems when an update is done that causes problems with something down the road. So they're going to want an annual review, and they're going to want certain things that you can sort of check the boxes on. They're going to want a business continuity plan. Where are you going to go if there's a problem with your building? How are you going to work? Where are you going to work? Who is in charge of that process? That can be a fairly extensive document itself. A disaster recovery plan, not necessarily just having disaster recovery, but what do you do when there's a disaster recovery? And that's obviously a subset of the business continuity plan. Incident response is huge these days. So you have that involved in two key areas. One is HIPAA. Anyone who's doing medical work or has healthcare data on their system, the HIPAA business partner agreements basically say, you got to tell somebody, and here's what you're going to do. If you have a breach, and data breaches can happen in a variety of ways, the primary ones we've already talked about, but if you have a breach to your system, what do you do? Who do you tell? Even if it's your fault, or the employee's fault, the employee has to be willing to step up and tell you what has happened and help you to solve that and alert any clients that are concerned with this. For those of you who've been reading in the paper about, is it Equifax, I think, had an issue where they just didn't tell anybody for a long time. These are very dangerous situations and can cause the firm immense embarrassment, pain, loss of business, etc. It can be very, very bad. So you need a plan for if something happens. You need a remote access policy. Who can work remotely? How are they allowed to work remotely? What is your method of authenticating that they're a real person? In other words, a real staff member, as opposed to someone who has obtained their credentials. When you terminate someone, what are the steps that you take to make sure that their access ends upon termination? Even with, look, I've employed many, many people in my career. There's about 40 of us here today that all work together, and I have the greatest colleagues in the world. They're people I trust. They're people I know. And when we have very little turnover here, we're more likely to hire somebody than we are to terminate anybody. But if someone is leaving for either voluntary or involuntary purposes, even though I care about and trust every one of these individuals, we are going to shut their access down right now. It's extremely important. Password policies are something that they're going to want, and I should have mentioned that earlier. So basically, they're going to want you to rotate your passwords. And Microsoft's operating systems, the server operating systems, have been capable of doing this for a very long time. And we recommend a pretty basic policy. Number one, you must have complex passwords. That would mean including upper and lower case, numbers, and symbols, and of a certain length. We recommend that those passwords rotate at least every 90 days. So when the user logs in on the 90th day, the system says, hey, you need a new password, type it in. Now that password policy should also include how many passwords they can have before they repeat one. Technically, they should never repeat it, but you can have a policy that says that the same password, a password cannot be used that has been used within the last 5 passwords or something like that. So you can have lots of policies around password security, but complex, rotate. These are not difficult things to do. You should never, ever, ever have a list of passwords. There is no need for a list of passwords. Whoever's administering the network can change a password for any user at any time. So if for some reason access is needed to that user's information, perhaps they're on vacation or leave for some reason, the administrator goes in, changes the password, and does whatever needs to be done. Keeping lists around means they can be found. And if they are found, guess what happens? We recently had an occurrence where someone was going in and looking at other people's emails and then talking all over the place about what was in there. Have a good password policy. It prevents that sort of thing. An encryption policy is something they're going to be looking for. How do you encrypt things that are being sent outside the office? Sometimes it's simple. You're sending from point A to point B. Both email systems allow the use of the most common encryption, which is called TLS. And in those cases, that's a relatively secure transaction. But you may want to encrypt an attachment. You might want to individually encrypt an email where the other end has to have a code to unlock it. Those are all policy things that you're going to need to think about if you do face one of these audits, because they are going to come up. Data access is going to be important. So do vendors access your data? A common one would be maybe an e-discovery vendor that assists you in organizing a particular matter, or assists you in gathering documents and preparing them for trial. A lot of times those are independent vendors that only come in when they're needed. So what the audit's going to ask is, do you turn that access off when it is not being used? Is it carefully controlled? Etc. And guests are not generally going to see data, but rather they might be there. using Wi-Fi. So is your Wi-Fi outside of your password or outside of your firewall, for example? You're going to want a physical security plan, so they are going to be looking for how you've secured anything on premise. They're going to be looking for how you control access to your suite. Sometimes they're even asking for things that you would never have as a law firm. Most law firms are in a building that they share with other people. Not many are in their own building. And when that happens, there's only so much physical security things that you can do within the confines of that building. They're going to want to know what your schedule is for penetration testing, and they're going to want to see the results of your last pen test. So in your best practices and your planning, you're going to want to have that pre-scheduled. So when the audit comes up the following year, and they will be auditing you every year, by the way, or maybe more often, you can just hand it over. You want to make these things as easy as you can. And another last one maybe, and there's certainly others, it's going to change firm by firm, but your handheld policy or your laptop policy or your tablet policy. Can you bring your own? Most firms say yes, work on whatever you want to work on. When you're traveling, use your handheld. We encourage you to do that. Not very many are supplying those things to their staff. And that brings up other things like overtime and data usage and all kinds of things on somebody's personal device. But the audits are usually going to be asking for some sort of MDM, that's mobile device management solution. Office 365 has some pretty good stuff built in, but there are others that that you could look at, and possibly the one that's oddly we see quite often is BlackBerry. BlackBerry has now moved into MDM, having realized that their business on their handheld was pretty much over. Let's talk a little bit about the benefits of a cloud network, because these audits are way easier and smoother with a cloud network. First of all, by nature, they're going to include evolving security. So the security stuff is going on all the time. You're getting patched automatically. You're getting all your operating systems are being kept up to date. And again, I'm speaking from our standpoint, because the way we build our networks, an insecure device is not allowed to connect. Insecure software is not allowed to be loaded. There are many firms that are still running Windows Server 2003. If you are absolutely wide open to the outside world. That is a retired operating system. It cannot be secured. A lot of times the auditors will want to know what security certificates you have. So a cloud network solves this quite easily. Again, a true cloud solution. AWS, for example, Amazon, they have every security certification that we're aware of. They have them all. So the banks love that. They want ISO 27001. They want SSA E16. There's a whole gamut of them that they might need, and it depends on whether you work overseas or not. But isn't it nice to already have them all? So any question that are asked about security certifications, you can check yes. Encryption is much easier because the large cloud providers provide hardware data at rest encryption, and the method that are used to access the systems. And I think this is a big differentiator between one cloud and another. Many of them will use, for example, remote desktop, which is a Microsoft feature, and it's not particularly secure. It's okay, it's pretty good. It uses some basic security parameters. In our case, we use Amazon Workspaces, which are far more secure in how they connect, how they secure the connection, how they encrypt the traffic. And that's something that they're going to want. So they're going to want end-to-end encryption, and they're going to want the data encrypted at rest. They're going to want, cloud networks are massively redundant. in a local system, usually what you have is RAID 5 or maybe RAID 10, which is redundant drives. In a true cloud solution, your data is going to be massively redundant. It's going to be redundant in multiple data centers spread out over a geographic area and potentially replicated to a whole distant geographic area. Say maybe you have data on the West Coast and the East Coast redundant to each other. Those kinds of things they're just cost prohibitive on a local network. The disaster recovery solutions for the cloud are phenomenal. I mean, first of all, you're already in disaster recovery all the time, and whether your building has power or not, your network is still working. You just go to the Starbucks and you log in. Physical security, they have everything you could ever imagine. And multi-factor authentication is much simpler. And the multi-factor in a cloud solution is for everyone all the time, as opposed to if you are in the office, you don't have it, but if you connect from outside the office, you do, which is the common solution for on-prem networks. So that means if someone does get into your office that's a bad actor, they might be able to get in. So, just a quick comparison. Most people are not going to get security certifications for their network. It's just super expensive and requires an ongoing commitment. In a true cloud solution, you have them all. Most on-site networks are not encrypted, although they do often employ some encryption technologies. In the cloud, you are encrypted end-to-end at all times. Most on-site networks have, the common one we see is a sonic firewall. There are many others. The cloud firewalls are far more sophisticated and faster. Multi-factor is easier. Enforced anti-malware is possible, and that's a really nice feature where you can't connect unless you have it. Having a nightly backup is common in a local network, whereas in the cloud you have multiple backups each day, or multiple snapshots I should say, and at the very minimum 90 recovery points, which, as I pointed out earlier, in a ransomware situation, haven't had that, but in a ransomware situation that would just be a key factor. Physical security, guards, dogs, generators, everything you ever wanted. So the security in a cloud solution is just so far past what you could ever do locally. So if you are concerned about security, the cloud is by far the way to go. And it can often save you money. One thing you're going to want, if you look over here to the left, you see the Affinity data center. It's the most sophisticated data center on earth. Look at that. These guys are just all over it. Not all cloud solutions are the same. One thing you're going to want is a private cloud. So that is fairly common, and it runs the gamut. You could have what are called colos, or a hosted solution where there's a data center somewhere and your stuff is there. In some cases, we see clients who rent space in a co-location. I'm not sure why you'd ever do that, but some people do. In a true cloud solution, you want to make sure that you have a private cloud. In Affinity's case, what we call ACP, Affinity Cloud Platform, it is a virtual private cloud. Your network is encrypted from all others. And in order to get those security certifications, and I want to be very specific about this, all the large cloud providers do this. They're required by those certifications that your network is encrypted from them. So, for example, a rogue Amazon employee could never get into your data. They don't have your encryption keys, only you do. And so it is protected even from data center employees. Now, that's not necessarily true of a colo or a hosted solution. Generally, it is, because they've got the certifications that require it, but not always. In one case, there was a local provider who was selling a cloud network where the connections, the virtual desktops, were indeed private, but the data was stored in a public area, and that was a little scary. we knew about it, but of course that's their problem, not ours. So what you want to do is make sure that you have a private cloud network. This is just an example of our, this is where we get to talk about our stuff, because we do these things for free. So it's sort of like, you know, you have those ads that pop up when you're looking at news or something like that. This is just a quick slice of the Amazon security certifications. CGIS is the law enforcement folks. ISO 27001 is the one that that the banks want, for example. Gosh, they have everyone we know of. In fact, they store data for the they store classified data for the U.S. government. I don't know if Symantec's completed their move, but Symantec is moving into the AWS cloud for security. FINRA, the bank regulators, they are in the AWS cloud. It is by far the most secure place on earth. So is the cloud right for you? First of all, you know, you have to look at the user's needs and client needs. For most people, the cloud is great. A cloud network is really no different than an on-premise network. You're still looking at Windows servers and email systems and those sorts of things. The big differences are you can get at it from anywhere, again, with proper security. So that means you don't have to worry about your building power and those sorts of things. You can run any software you want as long as it's reasonably up to date. You're not going to be able to run something that requires an insecure server. You wouldn't want to do that anyway. It's an extremely stable and reliable solution and an extremely resilient solution, even if you could lose a server and not know it because it's so quickly recovered. Do you have vulnerabilities in your on-prem network? I'll tell you the answer to that is yes, you do, no question. So the cloud will take care of those for you generally just by moving into the cloud, but you may want additional things, as we've mentioned, like multi-factor, that are optional. Do you have aging systems? And again, the cloud's going to be nice for you because the servers are going to be evolving all on their own. You don't have to do anything, and your servers are evolving. We look at, when we're talking to clients that are coming up to the end of their network's life, we always look at what their maintenance costs are, as well as what they've spent in hardware and software. Keep in mind your hardware is going to last a lot longer, the on-site hardware, and if you want to replace a PC, you might want to buy a zero client, which is half the price of a PC, and or you might want to, for a laptop, buy a Chromebook, which is like a $200 device. So maintenance costs take a lot of forms. It's not only intervention by IT providers, it's not only additional staff that might be required as systems age, it's not only the cost of keeping things up to date and buying software and those sorts of things. So when you add that all up, yeah, the cloud's usually a little less expensive, but if you're going to spend the same money and be able to work from anywhere, and your system is always updated and you don't have any other bills because the support is included, well, that's a pretty good deal. With that, I'm going to open this up for questions that any of you might have, and I'll ask you to follow Angie's instructions, which are on the screen here, and just type in whatever question you might have, and we'd be happy to answer that for you.
Standing by for questions.
Doesn't look like we're getting a whole. I must have done an incredible job.
Well, you did.
Everything.
You really did. Questions going once?
We certainly hope that you enjoyed today's presentation. If you haven't gotten an audit from one of your clients, you will. It's coming. This is a big deal today. So I want to personally thank you all for coming. I see a lot of familiar names. So hi to all my pals who came and showed up today, and hi to the Affinity staff that came today. It's real nice of you guys to attend.
Yeah, thank you very much, everyone. And just to let you know, we'll be posting the recorded session on our YouTube channel, and you'll receive an email with a link to that as soon as it's posted. So thank you very much, everyone. Okay, I think we'll go ahead and end the presentation. I see no questions coming in. Thank you, everyone.